The morning of revelation. The private aviation terminal gleamed under the early morning sun, its pristine glass walls reflecting the grandeur of luxury air travel. Elliot Chambers, a man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe, walked through the entrance with the quiet authority of a self-made billionaire. At 45, his achievements were the stuff of legends, taking a failing tech startup from the brink of bankruptcy to the Forbes 500 in under a decade. Today, however, was different. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that complemented his tall, athletic frame, Elliot carried himself with a sense of urgency. His flight to Geneva was not just another business trip. It was the cornerstone of a deal that could redefine international AI protocols. Beside him, his executive assistant, Mia Collins, matched his stride. Her tablet hummed with updates and last-minute changes to their itinerary. "Everything's on track," Maya said, her tone crisp and efficient. "We're ahead of schedule." Elliot nodded. "Good. Let's use the extra time to finalize our approach. This deal is critical." As they approached the counter, a middle-aged woman in a perfectly pressed uniform glanced up. Her name tag read Deborah. At first, her expression was neutral, but as her eyes fell on Elliot, a shadow of disapproval crossed her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone curt and unwelcoming. "Yes," Elliot replied, handing over his documentation. "We're on the 10:30 private charter to Geneva." Deborah barely glanced at the papers. Her lips tightened. "I'm sorry, but this terminal is for premium travelers only." Elliot frowned. "I'm well aware. That's why I'm here." Deborah's gaze lingered on him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll need to confirm your booking." Without waiting for a response, she picked up her phone, whispering into the receiver. Maya stepped forward. "Is there a problem? Mr. Chambers has traveled with your airline many times. Everything should be in order." Deborah's dismissive chuckle cut through the air like a blade. "I'm sure he has, but sometimes there are misunderstandings." Elliot stood silently, his jaw tightening. He had encountered this before. Subtle, unspoken prejudices that assumed his success was undeserved or fabricated. But here, at a terminal he partly owned through investments, it was a slap in the face. "I'll wait," he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed a storm brewing beneath. Deborah returned her attention to her computer, typing deliberately slow. Finally, she looked up, a thin smile on her face. "I'm afraid your flight has been canceled." "What?" Maya snapped. "That's impossible. We confirmed the itinerary this morning." "Schedules change," Deborah said with a shrug. "Perhaps you can find an alternative." Before Mia could protest further, Elliot placed a hand on her arm, his calm demeanor masking the simmering anger within. "Thank you," he said, his tone icy. "We'll handle it from here." As they stepped away from the counter, the whispers began. Other passengers in the waiting area watched, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. A few had recorded the interaction on their phones. "Unbelievable," Mia muttered, pacing beside him. "Do they have any idea who you are? I'm calling their CEO." "No," Elliot said sharply, his voice low but firm. "This isn't about who I am. It's about what just happened." "What do you mean?" Elliot turned to her, his expression resolute. "This isn't just a misunderstanding, Mia. It's systemic. We've seen it before in boardrooms, in hiring practices, and now here. If they treat me like this, imagine how they treat someone without the power to fight back." Mia nodded, her anger giving way to understanding. "So what's the plan?" Elliot looked out at the tarmac, where planes taxied to and from the runway, their engines humming with purpose. "We dig deeper. This isn't just about me or this flight. We're going to find out how far this route goes. And we're going to expose it." Over the next several hours, Elliot and Mia made calls, reviewed contracts, and began piecing together a timeline of events. By the time they left the terminal, the airline's regional operations manager was rushing to offer apologies, but the damage had been done. As the sun set, Elliot stood in his penthouse office, gazing out at the city skyline. On his desk lay files, emails, and notes from Mia's initial investigation. Patterns began to emerge, patterns that hinted at a deeper, more sinister problem. "This is bigger than a single incident," Elliot murmured. "It's a culture." Mia entered the office, her expression grave. "You were right. I've cross-referenced complaints from other passengers and employees. There's a consistent thread of discrimination, racial profiling, unjust denials of service, and even firings based on trumped-up accusations." Elliot's eyes hardened. "Then we're going after them. All of them." Mia raised an eyebrow. "This won't be easy. They'll fight back." "Let them," Elliot replied, his voice steady. "I didn't get here by backing down." The next morning, Elliot's team convened in the sleek, high-tech war room of his headquarters. Screens displayed live feeds, data points, and financial analytics. The air buzzed with urgency. Phase 1. Elliot began, addressing the room. "We gather evidence. Employees, passengers, partners, anyone who's been wronged. Phase 2. We hit them where it hurts, legally and financially." "And Phase 3? Maya asked. Elliot smiled grimly. "We dismantle the system that allows this to happen." The team nodded, their determination matching his. As they set to work, Elliot knew this was more than a fight for justice. It was a battle for the soul of corporate ethics, and he was just getting started. The gathering storm. Elliot's office hummed with activity. It was the heart of an emerging storm, a carefully orchestrated response to the injustice he'd faced. Unlike many billionaires who might have brushed off the incident as an unfortunate inconvenience, Elliot couldn't let it go. Not because of ego, but because he knew that what had happened to him wasn't isolated. He had built his empire by identifying patterns, and the patterns Mia uncovered were glaring. "Elliot," Maya said, standing in the doorway of his expansive office. Her face was a mix of excitement and urgency. "You need to see this." He motioned for her to come in, his focus still on a large screen behind his desk displaying real-time analytics of public sentiment surrounding the airline. Maya approached and placed her tablet on the table, showing a series of emails and social media messages. "These are from passengers and employees," she began. "Since word got out about your experience at the terminal, people are coming forward with their own stories. Discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination. It's worse than we thought." Elliot leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "How many?" "Over 300 complaints in less than 24 hours, Maya replied, scrolling through the messages. "And that's just what's come directly to us. I've spoken with a few former employees, and their stories are horrifying. Some were fired for speaking up. Others were pushed out through impossible working conditions." Elliot exhaled slowly. He tapped his desk, deep in thought. "The floodgates are opening." Mia nodded. "We need to decide how to proceed. Do we go public with this now, or do we hold off and build a stronger case?" Elliot stood and walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. The weight of the moment bore down on him. This wasn't just about the airline anymore. It was about the people who had been silenced, mistreated, and ignored for years. "Not yet," he said finally, turning back to Mia. "We're not just building a case against one company. We're uncovering a system. We need to be thorough, precise, and irrefutable." Over the next several weeks, Elliot and his team dove headfirst into the investigation. A secure server was set up to catalog the complaints, testimonies, and evidence pouring in from across the country. Former employees became whistleblowers, their fear of retaliation outweighed by their desperation for justice. Mia coordinated interviews with some of the more outspoken individuals. One such interview was with Carlos Alvarez, a former baggage handler who had worked for the airline for nearly a decade before being fired under suspicious circumstances. "They said I violated safety protocols," Carlos explained, his voice shaky but resolute as he sat across from Elliot in the war room. "But I didn't do anything wrong. I followed every procedure to the letter. The real reason they fired me. I filed a complaint about how they treated me and my coworkers. They didn't like that. Elliot leaned forward, his gaze intense. How did they treat you? Carlos hesitated, then took a deep breath. They gave us the worst shifts, the heaviest workloads, and barely enough time to rest between shifts. And when we spoke up, they made sure we regretted it. One guy, my friend Samuel, he had his pay docked for weeks. They claimed it was an accounting error. It wasn't. Mia typed furiously, documenting every word. And Samuel, is he willing to talk? Carlos nodded. I'll get him to call you. He's scared, but I know he'll want to help. The stories piled up. Each one painted a clearer picture of an organization that had perfected the art of silencing dissent. From racial profiling in hiring practices to systemic wage theft, the evidence was damning. Elliot brought in a team of legal experts, led by Victoria Jensen, a no-nonsense attorney known for taking down corrupt corporations. She wasted no time in assembling a strategy. This isn't just a lawsuit, Victoria said during a late-night strategy meeting. It's a reckoning. We're going to expose their entire playbook, and when we're done, they won't be able to operate in the shadows anymore. Meanwhile, Elliot's research team uncovered something even more sinister. Buried in financial records, they found a web of connections linking the airline to other companies across various industries. These companies shared board members, shell corporations, and suspicious financial transactions. They're not acting alone, Maya said, staring at the web of connections displayed on the war room's main screen. This is bigger than just one airline. This is an entire network. Elliot's jaw tightened. A syndicate, he muttered. Mia nodded. It's a possibility. If that's the case, taking down the airline is just the beginning. As the investigation deepened, Elliot faced mounting pressure from the airline's executives. They reached out through intermediaries, offering settlements and thinly veiled threats. One evening, as Elliot reviewed documents in his penthouse, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off, or we'll make sure you regret it. Elliot stared at the message, unflinching. He had faced threats before, but this was different. This was personal. He called Mia immediately. We need to increase security for everyone involved in this case. The pressure only fueled Elliot's resolve. He began reaching out to key players in media and government, carefully laying the groundwork for a public reckoning. Meetings were held in secret, alliances forged in boardrooms and quiet cafes. At the same time, he worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of the whistleblowers. Private investigators were hired to uncover dirt on the syndicate's enforcers, turning the tables on those who sought to intimidate them. One night, as Elliot and Mia worked late, she turned to him, her eyes filled with concern. This is going to get worse before it gets better, Elliot. Are you sure you're ready for that? He looked at her, his expression unwavering. I've been ready for this my whole life. They just didn't know it. In the weeks to come, the investigation reached a fever pitch. Anonymous tips revealed more connections, more victims, and more corruption. Elliot's team worked around the clock, piecing together a case that would not only dismantle the airline but expose the syndicate for what it was, a machine built on exploitation and greed. As the storm clouds gathered, Elliot stood at the center, unyielding. This was no longer just about justice. It was about rewriting the rules for those who came after him. Unmasking the syndicate. The war room was alive with tension. A sea of documents, monitors, and hastily scribbled notes dominated the space, but the air crackled with purpose. Elliot stood at the center, his presence commanding yet calm as he reviewed the latest findings. This was the pivotal moment, the tipping point where months of investigation were about to culminate into an unprecedented storm. Mia entered the room, her pace brisk. In her hands was a thick dossier, its corners slightly frayed from repeated handling. Elliot, she said, placing it on the table, we've confirmed it. Elliot turned, his sharp gaze locking onto her. "The syndicate?" She nodded. "It's bigger than we thought. This isn't just about one airline. They're tied to dozens of industries: hospitality, logistics, manufacturing, even healthcare. We've uncovered over 100 shell companies they use to funnel money and hide their tracks." Elliot leaned over the dossier, flipping through the pages. Each name, each connection, each financial transaction painted a chilling picture of a deeply entrenched network. "And their leadership." Mia hesitated. "We've identified 14 key figures: CEOs, board members, legal advisors, some of the most powerful people in the country. They're the ones pulling the strings." Elliot's jaw tightened. "Then we expose them all." The syndicate's power. As the team delved deeper, they unearthed the sheer scale of the syndicate's influence. They had orchestrated price-fixing scandals that affected millions, lobbied for laws that suppressed worker rights, and used their financial clout to silence anyone who dared to stand against them. Victoria Jensen, the attorney spearheading Elliot's legal team, arrived with her own findings. She placed a flash drive on the table. "This," she said, "is the smoking gun." Elliot plugged it into the war room's main computer. On the screen appeared a trove of emails and documents leaked from within the syndicate. One email chain stood out, a chilling directive from a high-ranking member detailing how to handle problematic employees and whistleblowers. "Terminate their contracts," the email read, "and ensure they never work in this industry again. If necessary, fabricate reasons for dismissal. We cannot allow dissent." "This is systemic," Victoria said. "It's not just a handful of bad actors. They've institutionalized abuse and corruption." Mia crossed her arms, her voice tight with anger. "They've destroyed lives, and they think they're untouchable. They've operated in the shadows for too long," Elliot said. "It's time to drag them into the light." The whistleblowers. To unmask the syndicate, Elliot knew they needed voices, people who could speak to the syndicate's actions firsthand. One by one, whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by the safety net Elliot and his team had created. There was Marcus Bennett, a former airline executive who had been ousted after questioning discriminatory hiring practices. "They didn't just fire me," Marcus told Elliot during a late-night meeting. "They ruined me, blacklisted me. My wife and I had to move 3 states away just to start over." Then there was Sarah White, a logistics manager who revealed how the syndicate funneled money through fake contracts. "I kept quiet for years," she admitted, her hands trembling as she signed an affidavit. "But now I want the world to know." Each story added weight to the case, a growing mountain of evidence that painted the syndicate as a malignant force. Elliot ensured every testimony was recorded, verified, and protected. This wasn't just about winning in court, it was about giving these people their voices back. Preparing for battle. As the weeks passed, the syndicate grew increasingly aware of Elliot's actions. Subtle warnings turned into overt threats. Anonymous emails flooded his inbox. Security footage revealed unknown cars parked near his home. Even his closest allies were targeted. Mia approached him one evening, her face etched with concern. "Elliot, we need to talk about your safety. They're escalating." "I'm not backing down," he said firmly. "I know," Maya replied, "but this isn't just about you anymore. If something happens to you, this fight dies with you." Elliot sighed, his resolve unshaken but the weight of the battle evident. "Then we make sure the fight doesn't depend on me. We build a coalition." The coalition. Elliot reached out to allies in unexpected places. Labor unions, civil rights organizations, and even rival corporations who had suffered under the syndicate's stranglehold joined the cause. Together, they pooled resources, shared intelligence, and prepared a coordinated strike. At the same time, Elliot's media team worked tirelessly to prepare the public for what was coming. Leaks of minor details about the syndicate began appearing in major news outlets, creating a buzz. Social media campaigns highlighted stories of those affected, their voices amplified by influencers and activists. The narrative was clear. The syndicate was a cancer, and Elliot Chambers was the surgeon preparing to cut it out. The media blitz. The day came when Elliot's team was ready to go public. A press conference was called, its location kept secret until the last minute to prevent interference. Journalists packed the room, cameras flashing as Elliot took the stage. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the syndicate's web of corruption. For decades, Elliot began, his voice steady but powerful. A group of powerful individuals has manipulated industries, exploited workers, and silenced anyone who stood in their way. Today, we say enough. He walked the room through the evidence, emails, financial records, testimonies. The room fell silent as the weight of the revelations sank in. Then came the bombshell. A list of the syndicate's key members, their names and positions displayed for all to see. This is not just about accountability, Elliot concluded. It's about dismantling a system that has thrived on greed and oppression, and we won't stop until justice is served. The aftermath. The press conference was a seismic event. News outlets ran the story nonstop, dissecting every detail of the syndicate's activities. Protests erupted outside the syndicate's offices. Social media exploded with calls for action, and the hashtag Unmask the Syndicate trended worldwide. The syndicate's members scrambled to respond. Some denied involvement, others went into hiding. But the tide had turned. Regulators launched investigations, shareholders demanded answers, and corporate partnerships dissolved overnight. As Elliot watched the chaos unfold from his office, Maya stood beside him, a rare smile on her face. "You did it," she said. Elliot shook his head. "We're just getting started." The counterattack. The syndicate was reeling. Their intricate web of corruption had been exposed to a relentless media frenzy, and public outrage was snowballing into a full-blown crisis. Stock prices for the implicated companies plummeted. Protesters gathered outside corporate offices in cities across the country, waving signs demanding accountability and justice. But the syndicate wasn't going down without a fight. A calculated retaliation. Elliot's office had become a fortress of strategic planning. Every day brought new challenges. Lawyers filing lawsuits designed to slow his team down, anonymous threats clogging their inboxes, and financial disruptions aimed at his businesses. Victoria Jensen, the lead attorney on the case, entered the war room with a grim expression. "They'd filed 3 new countersuits this morning," she said, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the table. One claims defamation, another alleges breach of confidentiality, and the third is a direct challenge to the whistleblower testimonies. Mia groaned. "They're throwing everything they've got to discredit us. They want to bleed us dry with legal fees," Victoria said. Standard playbook for corporations trying to crush opposition. Elliot remained calm, though his gaze darkened. "Let them. Every counterattack they make will only strengthen our case. We've prepared for this." Victoria nodded. "True, but they're escalating beyond lawsuits. Our cyber team detected multiple intrusion attempts on our servers last night. They're trying to breach our databases." Mia slammed her tablet on the table. "They're desperate. That's the good news. Desperate people make mistakes. Desperation doesn't make them any less dangerous," Victoria warned. "We need to stay vigilant. They have deep pockets, and they've been doing this for decades." Elliot stood, the room quieting as he spoke. "If they think intimidation and distractions will stop us, they don't know who they're dealing with. Double the cybersecurity team, secure the whistleblowers, and prepare to go on offense. They want a war. We'll give them one." Whistleblowers under fire. The whistleblowers faced the brunt of the syndicate's retaliation. Rosa Diaz, one of the most vocal former employees, found herself targeted by a coordinated smear campaign. False accusations appeared on social media, claiming she had falsified her work history and embezzled funds. Rosa called Elliot in tears one evening. "They're saying things that aren't true," she sobbed. "People I thought were my friends are turning against me." "Listen to me, Rosa," Elliot said firmly. "You're not alone in this. We expected this, and we're ready. I'll make sure the truth comes out." Within hours, Elliott's PR team launched a counter-campaign. Using verified evidence, they debunked the syndicate's false claims and highlighted Rosa's courage in coming forward. Public support for Rosa surged, and the syndicate's smear campaign backfired spectacularly. Similar tactics were used to protect other whistleblowers. Elliott personally ensured that each of them had legal support, financial assistance, and security. The syndicate's efforts to silence them only made their stories more compelling. Turning the tables, Elliott's team wasn't content to play defense. They launched their own offensive, leveraging every resource at their disposal. Investigators dug deeper into the syndicate's operations, uncovering even more damning evidence. Anonymous insiders began leaking documents, emboldened by the syndicate's weakened position. One of the most explosive discoveries was a cache of emails between high-ranking executives detailing bribes paid to public officials. The emails outlined how the syndicate manipulated legislation to protect their interests, suppress competition, and crush unions. "This is it," Victoria said during a late-night strategy session. "This evidence ties them directly to criminal activity: bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. It's no longer just a case of corporate misconduct. It's criminal." Elliott nodded. "We hand this over to federal prosecutors. Let them deal with the legal fallout while we keep applying public pressure." The team worked tirelessly to prepare the evidence for submission. When the documents were delivered to the Department of Justice, the response was immediate. Federal investigations were announced, subpoenas issued, and several syndicate members were placed under scrutiny. The syndicate strikes back. But the syndicate wasn't finished. As Elliott's evidence dismantled their empire, they resorted to even more aggressive tactics. His businesses became targets of sudden audits and inspections. Anonymous tips to regulators claimed violations that didn't exist. One evening, Mia burst into Elliott's office, her face pale. "The FAA just grounded your entire fleet," she said, holding her phone tightly. "They're claiming safety concerns, but we both know this is retaliation." Elliott clenched his fists. "How long?" "They're not giving a timeline," Maya replied. "They're hoping to cripple us financially." Elliott's mind raced. His aviation division was a significant revenue stream, and the grounding threatened to destabilize his company. But he refused to give the syndicate the satisfaction of watching him falter. "Bring in our legal and compliance teams," he said. "If they want to play dirty, we'll fight them on every front." Public outcry grows. Despite the syndicate's attempts to fight back, public outrage against them continued to grow. Protests swelled into the tens of thousands. Unions organized nationwide strikes, demanding better working conditions and accountability from corporations. Elliott's Foundation launched a new initiative to support workers affected by syndicate-linked companies. They provided legal aid, career counseling, and financial assistance, ensuring that families could survive the fallout of the syndicate's collapse. "This isn't just about taking them down," Elliott said during a televised interview. "It's about building a better future for everyone they've harmed. We're not just dismantling their empire. We're replacing it with something fairer, stronger, and more just." The interview went viral, solidifying Elliott's role as a champion of corporate accountability. His words inspired millions, fueling the movement and keeping the pressure on the syndicate. The tipping point. The breaking point came when one of the syndicate's own members flipped. Victoria had been negotiating with Michael Carter, a mid-level executive with knowledge of the syndicate's operations. Carter had initially resisted, fearing retribution, but the weight of the evidence against him and promises of immunity swayed him. Carter's testimony was explosive. He provided detailed accounts of the syndicate's inner workings, how they rigged bids, silenced dissenters, and maintained their iron grip on multiple industries. "This is the nail in their coffin," Victoria said after deposing Carter. "There's no coming back from this." The testimony was released to federal prosecutors and the media simultaneously. The syndicate's remaining members scrambled to protect themselves, but it was too late. Arrests began. Assets were frozen, and their influence crumbled. Victory in sight. As the syndicate's empire fell, Elliott and his team prepared for the final phase, ensuring that the systems enabling such corruption were dismantled. Legislative proposals for stricter corporate oversight gained momentum, supported by Elliott's foundation and an outpouring of public support. Maya looked at Elliott during a rare quiet moment. "You've done it," she said. "They're finished." Elliott shook his head. This was never just about them. It's about everyone they hurt. We've taken down the syndicate, but the real work is just beginning. Rebuilding a better future. The air in the James Smith Foundation's new headquarters was electric. The victory over the syndicate had sent shockwaves through corporate America, but Elliott knew that dismantling corruption was only half the battle. Now came the harder part, rebuilding systems that prioritized fairness, transparency, and opportunity. Elliott stood in the grand atrium of the Foundation's office, surrounded by journalists, allies, and whistleblowers. The room was buzzing with anticipation. He adjusted his tie and stepped up to the podium, his commanding presence silencing the crowd. "Today marks a turning point," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Together, we've exposed a system that thrived on exploitation and silencing dissent. But this victory is not an endpoint, it's a beginning. It's our responsibility to ensure the world we rebuild is better than the one we tore down." The room erupted into applause, and Elliott stepped down, allowing Mia and the Foundation's leadership team to present the specifics of their initiatives. Behind the scenes, a monumental effort was already underway, the plan for change. Elliott and Mia had worked tirelessly to design a comprehensive strategy for systemic reform. Their plan was ambitious, but they knew anything less would leave room for the same injustices to resurface. Workplace rights and advocacy. The Foundation launched a nationwide campaign to educate workers about their rights. Free workshops, online courses, and mobile apps were created to empower employees to recognize and combat unfair practices. "Knowledge is power," Mia explained during a strategy meeting. "If workers know their rights, they'll be less vulnerable to exploitation." Corporate accountability certification. Elliott introduced a groundbreaking initiative, a certification program for corporations that adhered to strict ethical standards. Companies that passed the rigorous evaluation process received a seal of approval from the Foundation, a mark of integrity that consumers and investors could trust. "We're giving companies a choice," Elliott said in an interview. "They can either adapt to these standards or risk being left behind in a world that demands accountability." Whistleblower protection network. Building on their success with the syndicate's whistleblowers, the Foundation established a permanent network to support individuals willing to expose corruption. The network offered legal representation, financial aid, and secure platforms for sharing evidence. Policy reform. Elliott partnered with lawmakers to propose new legislation aimed at closing the loopholes that allowed the syndicate to operate unchecked. Key reforms included mandatory transparency in corporate governance, stricter penalties for discrimination, and protections for workers who reported misconduct. Community reinvestment. The Foundation directed a significant portion of its resources toward rebuilding communities devastated by the syndicate's exploitation. Scholarships, job training programs, and small business grants were made available to those most affected. Resistance to change. Despite widespread support, the path forward was not without obstacles. Many corporations resisted the Foundation's reforms, arguing that the new standards were too stringent and costly to implement. Trade organizations lobbied against the proposed legislation, claiming it would stifle economic growth. Elliott anticipated this resistance and addressed it head-on. "I've built successful businesses," he said during a televised debate with a corporate lobbyist. "I understand the challenges companies face, but profit cannot come at the expense of people. The cost of fairness is far less than the cost of inaction." The debate went viral, garnering millions of views and further galvanizing public support for Elliott's initiatives. The impact begins. Within months, the Foundation's programs began showing results. The certification program gained traction as major corporations vied to align themselves with the Foundation's principles. Investors gravitated toward certified companies, viewing them as safer and more ethical investments. Meanwhile, the Workplace Rights Campaign empowered employees across industries. Stories began to emerge of workers standing up to abusive practices, armed with the knowledge and resources provided by the foundation. One such story came from Dina Parker, a warehouse worker in Chicago. After attending a foundation workshop, she rallied her coworkers to demand better safety conditions and fair wages. When management tried to intimidate them, Dina reached out to the foundation's legal team. "They had our backs," Dina said in a viral video. "And because of them, we won. We got the raises we deserved, and they fixed the safety violations." Rebuilding trust. The foundation's work extended beyond corporations and workers. Elliott recognized the importance of rebuilding trust in institutions that had failed to protect people. He initiated partnerships with government agencies, offering the foundation's resources to improve oversight and enforcement. During a meeting with federal regulators, Elliott emphasized collaboration. "We're not here to replace you," he said. "We're here to support you. Together, we can create systems that are resilient against corruption." The partnership bore fruit as regulatory bodies adopted best practices from the foundation's programs. Transparency increased, and whistleblower cases were handled more effectively. A personal mission. Amid the foundation's rapid growth, Elliott remained deeply involved. He met regularly with whistleblowers, workers, and community leaders, listening to their stories and ensuring their voices guided the foundation's work. One evening, he visited a vocational training center funded by the foundation. There, he met Jamal, a former truck driver who had been blacklisted after speaking out against unsafe conditions. "I thought my life was over," Jamal admitted, shaking Elliott's hand. "But this program gave me a second chance. Now I'm learning cybersecurity, and I've got a job lined up as soon as I finish." Elliott smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "You're proof of what's possible when we invest in people." A global ripple effect. The foundation's success began to ripple beyond the United States. Activists and leaders in other countries reached out, seeking guidance on replicating its programs. Elliott traveled internationally, sharing insights and building alliances. In Geneva, he addressed a packed auditorium at a United Nations conference on corporate ethics. "Injustice is not confined by borders," he said. "Our fight must be global because every worker, no matter where they live, deserves dignity and fairness." The legacy. Years later, as Elliott sat in his office overlooking the bustling city, he reflected on how far they had come. The James Smith Foundation had grown into a global force for good, its name synonymous with integrity and justice. The corporate landscape had transformed, with ethical practices becoming the standard rather than the exception. Mia entered, holding the latest impact report. "You're going to want to see this," she said, placing it on his desk. Elliott flipped through the pages, his face lighting up as he read the statistics. Workplace discrimination complaints down 70%, corporate compliance ratings at an all-time high, and thousands of families lifted out of poverty. "We did it," Maya said softly. Elliott looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We all did it, and it's only the beginning." The journey that had started with a humiliating moment at a private jet terminal had grown into a movement that changed the world. Elliott Chambers had turned his personal fight for justice into a legacy that would inspire generations to come, a movement beyond one man. The morning sun streamed through the expansive windows of the James Smith Foundation's global headquarters. Elliott sat in a quiet corner of the office, flipping through pages of handwritten letters. These weren't ordinary letters. They were messages from people whose lives had been transformed by the work of the foundation. From single mothers who had won fair wages to whistleblowers who had been vindicated, each story was a testament to the impact of the movement. As he read, his assistant entered the room with a soft knock. "Elliott," Maya said, carrying a stack of reports. "We've received word. The United Nations wants to collaborate on an international workplace rights charter." Elliott smiled, setting the letters aside. "It's time to take this fight global." The Foundation's global expansion. The partnership with the United Nations was the first step in what would become a worldwide campaign. Elliott's foundation was tasked with drafting a comprehensive workplace rights charter, a set of principles designed to eradicate systemic injustice in corporate environments across the globe. The charter included universal protections for whistleblowers. Whistleblowers would be shielded by international law, ensuring that those who exposed corruption or misconduct could do so without fear of retaliation. Transparency standards for corporations. Companies operating internationally would be required to disclose key metrics, including pay equity, diversity statistics, and employee satisfaction ratings. Global worker advocacy networks. A series of interconnected organizations that would offer legal aid, job training, and mental health resources to workers in vulnerable industries. Fair trade certification. Similar to the Foundation's Corporate Accountability Seal, this certification would apply to companies that adhered to ethical labor practices across their entire supply chain. Elliott and Mia traveled to Geneva to present the charter to the UN General Assembly. The room was filled with representatives from nearly every country, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. As Elliott took the stage, the weight of the moment settled over him. For too long, he began, his voice resonating across the hall. Workers have been treated as expendable resources. This ends now. Today, we have an opportunity to redefine what it means to do business, not just in one country, but across the world. His speech was met with a standing ovation, and by the end of the week, over 120 countries had signed on to adopt the charter. A decentralized movement. Elliott understood that no single organization could solve such a massive problem. Instead, he focused on decentralizing the movement, empowering communities to take charge of their own futures. The Foundation launched regional hubs in Africa, Asia, South America, and Europe, each tailored to address the unique challenges faced by workers in those regions. These hubs worked closely with local governments, unions, and NGOs to implement the Charter's principles on the ground. In India, the Foundation partnered with textile workers to combat exploitative labor practices. In Brazil, they supported farmers demanding fair prices for their crops. In South Africa, they provided legal aid to miners facing unsafe working conditions. These aren't just partnerships, Elliott explained during a press conference. They're alliances. We're not here to dictate solutions. We're here to listen, learn, and support. Challenges and sacrifices. The syndicate may have been dismantled, but its remnants lingered in the form of entrenched interests and corrupt systems. Not everyone welcomed the Foundation's efforts, especially in regions where corporate influence ran deep. In one instance, a multinational conglomerate in Southeast Asia waged a propaganda campaign against the Foundation, accusing it of undermining local economies. Billboards and social media ads claimed the Foundation's initiatives would lead to widespread unemployment. Elliott responded decisively, holding a town hall in the region and inviting workers, business owners, and community leaders to speak directly. Our goal isn't to dismantle economies, he told the crowd. It's to build economies that respect and uplift everyone. Fair treatment doesn't kill jobs, it strengthens industries. The truth resonated, and the smear campaign collapsed under the weight of public support, a personal shift. Years of relentless work had taken their toll on Elliott. While the movement had grown far beyond his initial vision, he began to feel the strain of being its figurehead. Late nights, long flights, and constant scrutiny left little time for personal reflection. One evening, as he walked through the Foundation's headquarters, he found Mia in the break room, sipping coffee. Her usually energetic demeanor was subdued. "Mia," he said, sitting across from her, "you've been with me since the beginning. What's on your mind?" She hesitated before replying. "You've accomplished so much, Elliott, but you're only one person. This movement can't depend on you forever." He nodded, her words echoing his own thoughts. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's time to step back and let others take the lead." Passing the torch. Elliott announced his decision during the Foundation's annual summit. Standing on a stage before thousands of supporters and live-streamed to millions worldwide, he delivered an emotional speech. "This movement was never about me," he said. "It was about all of us, workers, advocates, leaders, coming together to create a better world. Today, I'm stepping aside to make room for new voices, new ideas, and new leadership." Mia, who had been by his side since the beginning, was named the Foundation's new executive director. Rosa Diaz, now an accomplished advocate, was appointed head of global outreach. Elliot would remain involved as an advisor, but the day-to-day operations would be carried forward by the next generation of leaders. A movement flourishes. The transition marked a new era for the James Smith Foundation. Under Mia and Rosa's leadership, the foundation expanded its reach even further. They tackled issues like climate justice, gender equity, and the rise of automation in the workforce. Elliot watched from the sidelines with pride as the movement continued to grow. His work had sparked a revolution, but it was the people, workers, advocates, and allies, who sustained it. Legacy of change. Years later, Elliot sat on the porch of his coastal home, watching the waves crash against the shore. A young journalist had come to interview him for a retrospective on the movement. "Do you ever regret stepping back?" she asked. "Not for a second," Elliot replied. "Movements like this aren't about one person. They're about the collective will of people who believe in a better world. My job was to light the fire. It's their job to keep it burning." The journalist smiled, and it's burning brighter than ever. As the sun set over the ocean, Elliot reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from humiliation at a private terminal to spearheading a global revolution. It wasn't just about exposing injustice. It was about proving that change was possible, that the world could be reshaped if enough people stood together. And in that moment, he knew the fire he had lit would never go out, a legacy in motion. The James Smith Foundation had become a global powerhouse of reform and advocacy. Its reach spanned continents, its initiatives reshaped industries, and its impact touched the lives of millions. Yet for all its success, Elliot Chambers' departure as the public face marked a pivotal shift. It wasn't the end of the movement. It was the beginning of something far greater, a decentralized revolution driven by communities, workers, and ethical leaders worldwide. Elliot's life, once defined by the intensity of leadership, had transformed into one of quiet mentorship. He spent his days consulting, writing, and reflecting from his coastal retreat, but the world he had helped to change never stopped evolving. A global ecosystem of justice. The James Smith Foundation evolved into more than a singular entity. It became the nexus of a global ecosystem of justice. Regional hubs operated semi-autonomously, adapting the Foundation's principles to local contexts. These hubs fostered innovation, ensuring that solutions addressed the unique challenges faced by workers and communities. 1. Localized advocacy movements. In Southeast Asia, a Foundation partner spearheaded a campaign to end exploitative fishing practices. They equipped fishing crews with GPS trackers to prevent them from being trapped in illegal labor schemes. The program reduced human trafficking in the industry by 60% within 3 years. In East Africa, the Foundation collaborated with local organizations to challenge land grabs by multinational agribusinesses. Farmers were provided with legal representation, and sustainable farming methods were introduced, enabling communities to reclaim their livelihoods. 2. Educational infrastructure. Education became a cornerstone of the Foundation's mission. Schools and vocational training centers were built in underserved areas, offering not just technical skills, but also courses on leadership, ethical entrepreneurship, and civic engagement. One such center in Sao Paulo trained young women in software engineering, helping them secure jobs in Brazil's burgeoning tech sector. Graduates from this program created a ripple effect, founding startups that prioritized ethical hiring practices and inclusivity. 3. Transforming the corporate landscape. The Foundation's certification program had evolved into a gold standard. Companies vying for the seal underwent rigorous audits, and those found lacking faced public scrutiny. Consumer behavior began to shift, with people prioritizing products from certified ethical companies. This accountability even extended to small and medium enterprises. In Kenya, a network of local businesses adopted the foundation's principles, forming a cooperative that boosted profits while ensuring fair wages for workers. The Chamberlain Initiative. Elliott's quieter role didn't mean he had stopped innovating. Using his personal fortune, he launched the Chamberlain Initiative, an independent think tank dedicated to exploring the future of ethical leadership and technology's role in shaping equitable systems. The initiative focused on three key areas: artificial intelligence for equity. The team developed algorithms designed to identify and eliminate bias in hiring, pay, and promotion practices. These tools were adopted by Fortune 500 companies, leveling the playing field for marginalized workers. Sustainable innovation. The Chamberlain Initiative funded research into sustainable supply chains, ensuring that technological advancements didn't come at the cost of environmental or human exploitation. Leadership for tomorrow. Scholarships and mentorship programs targeted young leaders who showed potential to drive systemic change. Participants graduated not only with technical expertise, but also with a deep understanding of ethical governance. One mentee, Sophia Alarcon, became a prominent figure in the renewable energy sector. Under her leadership, her company transitioned entire communities to clean energy while prioritizing jobs for displaced workers. The ripple effect. By now, the foundation's work had inspired countless other organizations to join the movement. Labor unions, grassroots activists, and even governments adopted the foundation's methodologies. A coalition known as Global Justice for All emerged, uniting disparate groups under a shared vision of fairness and dignity. Elliott's efforts had also influenced corporate culture at the highest levels. CEOs who once dismissed ethical practices as idealistic began incorporating them into their strategies. One such leader, Aaron Pierce of Pierce International, attributed his company's transformation to Elliott's example. "I used to think success was measured by profits," Aaron said at a leadership summit. "But Elliott showed us that true success is measured by the lives you improve." Confronting new challenges. Even as progress was made, new challenges arose. Automation and AI displaced millions of workers, creating economic instability. Climate change exacerbated inequalities, forcing communities to adapt to harsher conditions. Political resistance to reform emerged, with populist leaders framing the foundation's efforts as a threat to national sovereignty. Mia, now the executive director of the foundation, tackled these issues head-on. She led a campaign to introduce Universal Basic Employment, UBE, a program where displaced workers were retrained for roles in green industries, healthcare, and technology. The foundation's advocacy helped secure pilot programs in 5 countries, proving that UBE could reduce unemployment and increase economic stability. In response to political resistance, Rosa Diaz spearheaded a global awareness campaign, reminding the world that the foundation's mission wasn't about control, it was about empowerment. Her speeches, delivered in multiple languages, reignited public support and quelled doubts. Elliott's reflection. As the years passed, Elliott found himself reflecting on the movement's origins. One evening, while organizing old files, he came across a photograph of his father, James Smith. The photo had been taken at a labor rights rally decades earlier, showing James standing defiantly in the face of opposition. Elliott smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. His father's fight had become his own, and together they had left an indelible mark on the world. That evening, he wrote in his journal, "What began as a personal fight for justice has become something far greater. The movement isn't mine anymore, it belongs to the world. And as long as there are people willing to stand up for what's right, the fire we lit will never be extinguished." A monument to change. In the heart of New York City, a monument was unveiled in honor of the movement. The sculpture depicted 2 hands reaching upward, symbolizing unity and hope. Etched into its base were the words, "For those who dared to demand dignity, and for the countless lives their courage transformed." Elliot attended the ceremony, standing alongside Mia, Rosa, and the many leaders who had carried the torch forward. As the crowd applauded, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The journalist who had interviewed him years earlier approached, now older but just as inquisitive. "Looking back, do you think the world is where you hoped it would be?" Elliot thought for a moment, then replied, "The world will never be perfect, but it's better than it was, and that's enough." A movement beyond one man. The legacy of Elliot Chambers, the James Smith Foundation, and the countless people who had joined their cause was undeniable. They had redefined what it meant to lead, to work, and to live with integrity. And though Elliot's role had changed, the movement continued to thrive, proof that real change was possible when people dared to dream beyond themselves. A world reimagined. The movement Elliot Chambers had ignited had long outgrown him. The James Smith Foundation and its global partners were now shaping not just industries but cultures and policies across the world. While Elliot had stepped back from daily operations, his vision continued to serve as the bedrock of the worldwide push for fairness, dignity, and systemic reform. From his quiet coastal home, Elliot watched the world change, not in leaps, but in steady, deliberate strides. Yet he knew the battle for equity was far from over. A technological crossroads. As the global economy evolved, new challenges emerged. Automation and artificial intelligence had revolutionized industries, bringing incredible efficiencies, but displacing millions of workers. In developing nations, this shift was particularly devastating. Factories closed, call centers emptied, and agricultural workers were replaced by drones and machines. The James Smith Foundation was among the first to recognize this as the new frontier of injustice. Under Mia's leadership, the foundation partnered with the Chamberlain Initiative, Elliot's independent think tank, to address these challenges. 1. The Universal Retraining Network, URN. The foundation launched the Universal Retraining Network, a global program to equip displaced workers with skills for the 21st century. From ad programming to renewable energy installation, the URN provided training free of charge, supported by grants from tech companies that had profited from automation. In one instance, a community in Detroit, once devastated by factory closures, was transformed into a hub for solar panel manufacturing. Workers who had once assembled cars now built the technology powering the future. "We lost everything," one worker said during a televised interview. "But now we're building it back, stronger and greener." 2. Ethical automation standards. Elliot, alongside industry leaders and government representatives, helped draft the global ethical automation standards. These guidelines required companies to implement social responsibility measures, including job transition programs and profit-sharing models for displaced workers. The push faced fierce resistance from some corporations, but Elliot's persistent lobbying, combined with public pressure, forced many to comply. Countries that adopted the standards saw reduced unemployment rates and smoother transitions for affected communities. 3. Worker-owned enterprises. The foundation encouraged a new economic model, worker-owned enterprises. By providing funding and resources, they empowered workers to collectively own and operate businesses. In Bangladesh, garment workers who had been laid off during automation transitions came together to form their own cooperative. The cooperative not only thrived, but also became a model of ethical production for the global fashion industry. Climate justice and corporate accountability. Climate change continued to exacerbate inequalities worldwide. Coastal cities faced rising sea levels, while agricultural regions battled droughts and floods. The James Smith Foundation recognized that environmental justice and labor rights were deeply intertwined. 1. The Green Reinvestment Fund. The foundation partnered with governments and international organizations to launch the Green Reinvestment Fund. This initiative funneled resources into renewable energy projects, sustainable agriculture, and climate-resilient infrastructure in vulnerable regions. In sub-Saharan Africa, the fund supported the development of solar-powered irrigation systems, enabling farmers to grow crops year-round despite changing weather patterns. The result was both economic empowerment and environmental sustainability. 2. Holding polluters accountable. The Foundation's legal team launched high-profile lawsuits against corporations with a history of environmental negligence. In one landmark case, they successfully sued an oil company responsible for devastating a river ecosystem in South America. The settlement funded the restoration of the river and provided reparations to affected communities. 3. Grassroots climate leadership. Through scholarships and mentorship programs, the Foundation nurtured a new generation of climate activists. These young leaders advocated for policies that balanced environmental protection with economic development, ensuring that no community was left behind. A global wave of equity. By this time, the ripple effects of the movement were undeniable. Governments, corporations, and communities were transforming. But some regions remained resistant to change. Authoritarian regimes and deeply entrenched corporate interests tried to block progress. The Foundation's countermeasures. The Foundation doubled down on its efforts in these regions. It worked with international watchdogs to shine a light on abuses and offered safe havens to whistleblowers fleeing persecution. In one case, an investigative journalist from Eastern Europe reached out to the Foundation after uncovering a massive corruption scandal involving a mining conglomerate. The Foundation provided protection, legal aid, and a platform to publish their findings, sparking widespread protests and forcing the conglomerate to close its operations. A new alliance. Elliot, though no longer in the spotlight, helped form the Global Alliance for Equity and Justice, a coalition of governments, NGOs, and businesses committed to systemic reform. The alliance launched the world's first Global Fairness Summit, drawing millions of viewers as leaders shared strategies and pledged to continue the fight for equality. The personal cost. Despite the movement's success, Elliot faced moments of doubt. He often questioned whether the world could truly sustain these changes or if it would regress once the momentum faded. He leaned heavily on the relationships he had forged, Mia, Rosa, and a growing circle of allies, to keep his faith alive. Mia visited him often, sharing updates and seeking advice. During one visit, she admitted her own fears. "What if we're just delaying the inevitable?" she asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Elliot placed a hand on her shoulder. "Change is never inevitable, Mia. It's constant effort, constant vigilance. But look at what we've accomplished. Look at the lives we've touched. Even if it's temporary, it's worth it." A new generation rises. As Elliot aged, the movement passed further into the hands of younger leaders. These individuals, many of whom had benefited directly from the Foundation's programs, brought fresh energy and ideas. One such leader was Amara Johnson, a former garment worker turned activist. Amara had risen to prominence after organizing a global boycott of unethical fashion brands. Now she led the Foundation's Global Outreach Division, expanding its reach into regions that had previously resisted change. At a summit in Cape Town, Amara spoke passionately about the future. "We're not here to follow the status quo," she said. "We're here to rewrite it." The legacy. Years later, the world looked vastly different. The movement had reshaped industries, revitalized communities, and inspired countless others to take up the fight for justice. The James Smith Foundation remained at the forefront, but its strength lay in the millions who had joined its cause. Elliot, now in his 80s, spent most of his time writing and mentoring. His memoir, Unbroken Threads, Weaving Justice into the Fabric of the World, became an international bestseller, inspiring new generations to dream of a fairer world. One quiet evening, as he watched the sunset from his porch, Mia called. "We're dedicating a new training center in your name tomorrow," she said. "It's in the same city where the syndicate first tried to stop you." Elliot chuckled softly. "I'll be there." The movement beyond measure. The dedication ceremony was attended by thousands. As Elliot stood before the crowd, flanked by Mia, Rosa, Amara, and countless others, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The training center wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of collective action. "This isn't my legacy," Elliot said, his voice steady despite his age. "It's ours. And as long as there are people willing to fight for justice, this movement will never end." The crowd erupted into applause, and as Elliot looked out at the sea of faces, workers, activists, leaders, he knew the fire he had lit would continue to burn, brighter than ever. A future forged in unity. The James Smith Foundation had become more than an organization. It was now a blueprint for how humanity could rebuild systems rooted in equity and integrity. The world Elliot Chambers once knew, where corruption and exploitation thrived unchecked, was slowly giving way to one of accountability and opportunity. But even as the foundation matured into a force of nature, new horizons demanded exploration. Elliot, now revered as a symbol of transformative leadership, understood that his work wasn't done. The fight for justice had shifted into a new phase, one where the lessons of the past had to be woven into the fabric of the future. The age of technological justice, the rapid evolution of technology, had brought unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Artificial intelligence, automation, and blockchain were reshaping industries at breakneck speed. While these innovations promised efficiency and advancement, they also posed risks of deepening inequality and systemic bias. 1. Ethical AI and automation. The Chamberlain Initiative, still operating under Elliot's guidance, launched a global consortium focused on creating ethical AI standards. The initiative aimed to ensure that machine learning algorithms were free of biases that marginalize certain groups. One groundbreaking project, AI for All, developed an open-source platform for small businesses and startups to access equitable AI tools. These tools ensured fair hiring practices, transparent performance evaluations, and unbiased data analysis. Elliot spoke at the consortium's first conference, addressing a crowd of technologists, policymakers, and activists. "Technology should be a tool for liberation, not oppression," he said. "If we fail to guide it with purpose, we risk repeating the injustices of the past." 2. The Blockchain Justice Initiative. In collaboration with global innovators, the Foundation introduced the Blockchain Justice Initiative. This initiative used blockchain technology to create immutable records of workplace agreements, whistleblower reports, and environmental audits. In rural Indonesia, the initiative revolutionized the palm oil industry. Farmers, once exploited by corrupt middlemen, used blockchain to track their crop's journey and ensure fair compensation. The transparency restored trust and eliminated predatory practices. Environmental equity. As climate change accelerated, the Foundation expanded its focus on environmental equity. Disadvantaged communities bore the brunt of natural disasters, resource scarcity, and displacement, while wealthier nations dominated the green energy transition. 1. Climate Reparations Fund. The Foundation partnered with international organizations to establish the Climate Reparations Fund, providing financial support to communities disproportionately affected by climate change. The fund rebuilt villages devastated by floods in Bangladesh, restored farmland in sub-Saharan Africa, and relocated entire communities in the Pacific Islands. 2. Green Workforce Initiative. The Green Workforce Initiative retrained fossil fuel workers for renewable energy jobs. In Appalachia, coal miners learned to install wind turbines and solar panels. The initiative not only provided new livelihoods but also strengthened local economies. 3. Youth Climate Leadership Program. Recognizing the power of younger generations, the Foundation launched the Youth Climate Leadership Program, equipping students with the tools to advocate for policy change and sustainable practices. A young leader from Brazil, Sofia Mendes, emerged as a global voice, rallying millions to demand stronger environmental protections. Governance for the people. Even as the Foundation's initiatives thrived, Elliot and his team recognized that governance itself needed reform. Corruption and inequality thrived in opaque systems where decisions were made behind closed doors. 1. Citizen assemblies. The foundation advocated for citizen assemblies, where everyday people deliberated on policy decisions alongside elected officials. These assemblies, piloted in Canada and Scandinavia, brought diverse perspectives to issues like healthcare, housing, and labor rights. 2. Global Corporate Watchdog. The Foundation worked with the United Nations to create the Global Corporate Watchdog, an independent body that monitored multinational corporations for compliance with human rights and environmental standards. Companies found guilty of violations faced sanctions and public exposure. 3. Open Data Governance. The Foundation championed open data governance, a framework that required governments and corporations to publish accessible data on their operations. The initiative empowered journalists, activists, and researchers to hold institutions accountable. A world beyond borders. Eliot's movement increasingly blurred the lines between nations. The challenges they faced, climate change, technological ethics, labor rights, were universal. Borders, he argued, were artificial constructs that couldn't contain the solutions humanity needed. At a summit in Nairobi, Eliot addressed leaders from 50 nations. Justice is not confined by geography, he said. If one community suffers, we all suffer. It's time we think beyond borders and build a world where opportunity and dignity are universal. The summit marked the beginning of the Global Equity Compact, an agreement among nations to collaborate on issues like climate resilience, equitable trade, and education access. The future of leadership. Eliot often reflected on the nature of leadership. His journey had taught him that true leaders don't seek control, they empower others to lead. To that end, he devoted his remaining years to mentoring the next generation. 1. The Chambers Academy. The Chambers Academy was established as a leadership institute, training activists, policymakers, and executives in ethical decision-making and transformative governance. Graduates of the Academy went on to lead initiatives that changed the world. One graduate, Amina Khalid from Nigeria, became the youngest Secretary General of the United Nations. Under her leadership, the UN adopted sweeping reforms that made it more transparent and inclusive. 2. The Legacy Fellowship. The Legacy Fellowship supported innovators and change-makers in underserved regions. The fellowship funded projects like mobile health clinics in rural India, education technology in East Africa, and affordable housing initiatives in the United States. Eliot's final years. Eliot, now in his 90s, had become a living legend. His days were filled with writing, mentoring, and quiet reflection. He often said his greatest achievement wasn't the Foundation's success, but the countless people who had taken up the cause. One crisp autumn morning, he received a letter from a young activist in Sierra Leone. It read, "Dear Mr. Chambers, I'm writing to thank you. I recently led a campaign to end unsafe working conditions in my community. When I doubted myself, I thought of your story. You proved that one voice could ignite change. Because of you, I believe I could make a difference." Eliot folded the letter, a tear sliding down his cheek. He had started this journey with a single act of defiance. Now he was part of a global symphony of voices demanding a better world. The unending flame. At 95, Eliot passed away peacefully, surrounded by family, friends, and allies who had been with him through every battle. His funeral was not a somber affair, but a celebration of a life that had changed the world. Monuments were erected in his honor, but Eliot's true legacy was the movement he had inspired. From bustling cities to remote villages, people continued his work, guided by the principles he had championed. On the anniversary of his passing, millions gathered around the world to light candles. The glow illuminated streets, fields, and homes, a reminder that the flame Eliot had ignited burned brighter than ever. And so the movement lived on, a testament to the power of one person to spark a revolution, and the power of many to sustain it. The world had been reimagined, not by a single man, but by the collective will of humanity to strive for justice, dignity, and hope.